Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, the voice of New Eden, and this is the CSM 17's the Eve Universe show's continued coverage of the CSM 17. Got it all backwards, but that's all right. We've got a pro here with us. We've got Phantomite, who is going to make up for my amateurness. How's it going, Phantomite?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Things are going pretty well. The campaigning is going pretty well. I feel like in a bunch of other interviews, I've been able to field very, very fair questions about some of my views. And I've been growing support in my Discord, which anybody watching, you'll find links to my Discord on Phantomite.com.
Right. Yeah, we have that open. We have, as always, we have your normal forum post, but then you also have this really well filled out website, Phantomite.com.
I do think it's really well filled out and incredibly slow because I am not a web developer.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you threw that in there because I was about to say, like, you're really complimenting yourself, but reining it in a little bit was probably the right move. All right, so let's get started. Here's one of the things. You're one of those examples of what has been kind of bothering me about the narrative of the CSM this year. Because what I keep on hearing is that there's only 3 incumbents. And if they don't get elected, then there won't be anybody with experience because they're the only 3 people that have been on the CSM before. But yet we also have 3 other people that have been on the CSM before. You being one of them. So do you feel that you're an incumbent? How do you feel about this idea that, like, you're not considered a previous CSM in a lot of these conversations?
I think that people who wouldn't consider me as being a previous CSM with experience, I think that they're just thinking in a reasonably easy way about the problem. I mean, if you looked at the complexities of how you would define these kind of things, then you'd have to give yourself all sorts of asterisks and qualifiers to what you are saying. So I don't begrudge people for not regarding me as having experience and not bringing that in. It's just simpler to say something simple instead, isn't it?
Technically correct is the best kind of correct, I suppose.
Yeah.
But so you aren't an incumbent, though, not because of
definitely not an incumbent,
right? But like no. so in the case of Steve, he took 2 years off. In the case of Torvald, he took 1 year off, I think it was. In the case of you didn't get elected last year.
I tried very hard. Yeah.
What happened?
Quite frankly, there was somebody brilliant who ate votes that would have otherwise gone to me. I would have been really bitter about not getting on because there's so much that I want to accomplish, right? But if you look at the results that there were, you can see that I wasn't feeling the reason wasn't feeling bitter about last year. I was very happy that Suetonia got on.
Right.
Suetonia shares a lot of the same causes that I did. And if you look at the results, you'll see that I was second behind him in huge numbers of his votes. I was overall, at the end of it all, I was just a little bit disappointed that I didn't get it, but I felt very secure that somebody good was in that position who I think really deserved the spot.
Right. Well, that's a very graceful way of putting it. I'm going to say.
I know it sounds graceful, but it's also true.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't saying it wasn't true. I was just trying to give you credit for it.
Yeah.
But so my question though is, like, it's a huge field, 45 people, only 3 incumbents. Null blocks are going to get their choices most likely than not. There's not that many open cards. We've yada yada yada. We talk about this all the time. Last year you made a go for it. You were an incumbent, and you still lost. Why do you think that now you can win under the current situation? Like, you would think that it would be easier for you to get elected as an incumbent than now.
I feel exactly the same about my very first year. The in the lead up to CSM 15, I was a complete unknown name, and I managed to get on. If I can do that, if I can go from no recognition to being trusted by the player base because of my interviews, because of my opinions, and because of my solutions to problems, if I can go from no support and an unknown to being on the CSM, then I feel I've got an even better chance now, not just because I've been a bit more in the public eye for 2 years now, but also because I think I've also developed and refined a lot of my viewpoints to be, quite frankly, better viewpoints than I had before with the same ultimate aims.
All right. Well, in that case, let's go ahead and jump into some of those viewpoints. We'll just get down the first subsection that you have on your website is structure changes and concepts.
Yes.
Where you say like infrastructure no longer anchorable within instant reach of a Stargate. I assume that you mean like on grid with a Stargate.
Yes, yes, and you know, and even if 10,000 kilometers was off grid, that's still, for instance, that's too close. That is instant undock, align to the gate, and warp to respond to combat on the gate. Gates, of course, in EVE Online being one of the most important places for spontaneous PvP to occur. And I don't feel that people should be able to live within 3 seconds of that battlefield site.
Okay. How's that any different than having like a capital umbrella?
Because a capital umbrella has to have a little bit more teamwork with Sinos and organization. If you jump into a system where a bunch of people live, notably in nullsec, and they've got their keep star anchored 1,001 kilometers off the gate, if you engage something on the gate, somebody can undock. They push the undock button. 2 seconds later, they've loaded the grid, and then 3 seconds later, they're on the grid attacking you once they've warped to the gate. And I feel that that's far too much control over such an important piece of geography.
How close is right, I guess? Like, what is the minimum distance requirement?
That is the impossible question, to have an exact idea.
Well, eventually somebody's going to have to put a number in a database if you're going to make this happen.
Somebody's definitely going to have to put it on. If we were going for an arbitrary number, then let's say 10 million kilometers. It'll add a little bit more time on the acceleration and deceleration of the warp.
See, I was going to be aggressive. I was going to say like 1 AU.
Well, you know, if that was on the table, I would wholeheartedly say yes. I like that. I think that that's a good suggestion if CCP were to suggest that. Don't forget that also having a citadel on a gate means that you can have invulnerable, cheap, not even cloaked eyes watching that piece of geography.
What's funny though is that, like, as an explorer, I actually adore nullsec groups that put structures on their gates, especially regional gates, right? Because regional gates often don't have a planet or something like that nearby to them. So if I'm warping to one of those gates, I'm warping blind. Even if I warp at range, if they put up their bubbles correctly and they're clever correctly, or if I'm unlucky enough that I can be pulled into a drag bubble and dunked. But if there's a structure on grid with them, I can usually use that as my pounce. So I find it incredibly valuable for that purpose.
Well, there are, in the vast majority of systems, there are going to be celestials to a reasonable distance side on to a gate so that you could come at a different angle and not land in a bubble unless they have really gone absolutely insane with the number of bubbles and the coverage of them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yes, you can. You always go from and I do that, but I mean, I'm that level of paranoid where it's like, even if I do that, maybe they've anticipated that, whatever. So like the ability to land on a pounce is something I usually go for. Now that being said, that may also be a good reason to not allow structures on gates, because if you're saying that regional gates are supposed to have that kind of exposure, it minimizes that. I can now move around in nullsec way safer thanks to your structures. That doesn't seem necessarily right.
It's about control over the geography. And I feel that this is one of multiple aspects of structures that gives far too much agency over the geography when people should be fighting the geography on both sides.
So speaking of people fighting the geography, let's move on to Syllabix jump fatigue. A lot of people have suggested this is a very popular thing. Old jump bridges used to have jump fatigue. Jump fatigue was added into the game in order to minimize capital projection. And now we have people complaining about projection again because of jump gates. I, however, have often argued that the problem should always come from players when possible. Therefore, that the solution should be not necessarily putting an inherent negative into jump bridges, but rather make them more vulnerable, lower their defenses, allow them to be hacked, allow them to be more accurately or effectively disrupted, because having a jump bridge network that you rely on and then a node knocked out of it at a key time, I feel like that's way cooler. So, but you want jump fatigue. Convince me.
I want jump fatigue because if you added jump fatigue to Ansiblex, it would turn them into a strategic war piece of infrastructure rather than an everyday travel piece of infrastructure. Right now, as an everyday travel piece of infrastructure, it essentially allows the owners of the region to skip any geographical risks, or at least hugely minimize the geographical risks of just day-to-day movement around. And I think it's literally as simple as that. But I do have something which I think you might gel nicely with your desire for
Hit me up.
These things to be attackable. Before Citadels, we used to have some trust-based mechanics. Are you aware of any of the trust-based mechanics that there used to be regarding infrastructure?
Well, that's a very vague term, but well, you mean like how POSs had various different, like you had to give people access to the POSs to be able to even use your jump bridges to begin with?
Yes.
Right.
So it used to be the case, and this applies much more broadly than just Ansiblex or jump bridges as it was then. As your group got larger, it became basically less and less likely that those passwords would be able to remain secret.
Sure.
Or, if you wanted them to remain secret, they would only be given out to many times smaller set of trusted members.
Or they were changed, and then people like didn't put in the right one, and then funny things happen, and people get blown up, and hilarity ensues.
So, if you were to also add passwords at the same time to Ansiblex, it would give the opportunity for enemies to find out and use them themselves. It would, and if the owners didn't want that to happen, then Ansiblex would not be an everyday travel item. They would be something used again, tactically in organized ops. And it's I think it's a very trust-based mechanics. I think are a opportunity for incredibly natural anti-gigablock mechanics that are not anti-sandbox. Some people talk about solving the fact that some groups are very large by putting some people say things like, oh, make it so that when you've got more than 200 people in fleet, somebody gets self-destructed every half an hour. And it's like, no, I don't want to spoil the sandbox. I just want there to be more opportunities in it. And I think that trust-based mechanics is the ideal solution to giving toys to the players that smaller, tighter groups can use, and the opportunity to use these toys goes away as you get larger.
So rather than having Syllabix is using
an ACL.
ACLs, you would like them to use passwords. I thought that passwords and the jankiness that come from them were one of the things that we always had a problem with when it came to POSs. Like that is like one of the POS code things was like the complexity of like standings and POS passwords and how they all related and broke down.
So code a new implementation of it.
So do it right. Do it again, but right this time. Is that what you're saying? Okay. That's fair.
Exactly. I mean, for instance, there are a number of aspects of Citadels that do replace a number of aspects of POSs. And so the aim here was, this code is terrible. Let's just make better code for these new things.
Right.
Let's do it for this.
I agree. I mean, it's a fair argument. I
Yeah.
still would like it that like a small group could hit a structure or, hit an Ensilibix and knock it out. And it might be easy to bring it back up if you go out and take care of it. But, if you do it at the right time, I love the idea of sabotage, like a small group having their own op where it's like as soon as we start hitting this place, we know they're going to move. So hit this Ensilibix right beforehand to take out their network and cut them off. Like, I feel like this really, really should be something in the game, like.
Yes. So the issue with that is that it's great, but the implementation would need some serious thought, because how do you? I mean, essentially during an actual full-on war, then the gates being hacked or disabled or disrupted in some way would be the norm 24 hours a day, making them pointless. Or maybe that's how it should be. Maybe during a war, this infrastructure doesn't operate.
I mean, if you can't stop savages from knocking over your roads all the time, then you don't get roads.
I mean, this is something. This is a concept that you can extend. The idea of, I mean, for instance, okay, here we go. So, when CCP announced that the PDS was going to require ammo, a number of people were very upset, saying, why do you hate the logistics guys? We've now got to bring ammo to all these things. And they said, how do you expect us to spend all this time giving ammo to so many structures? And my answer was, well, don't have so many structures.
Yeah, that's a weird one, right? Like,
it's not weird. It's a very broadly spread type of opinion, a way of looking at it.
Oh, it's common.
A lot of people.
That's for sure.
A lot of people also, as these Citadel changes have been slowly revealed by CCP, a lot of people, and okay, some arguments are worth listening to, but the overall arguments about, for instance, the nerfing of the weapons on Citadels, people are saying, but you're just making attack so strong compared to defense. And my answer is, go be the attacker if it's so strong. If being the attacker is overpowered, go be the attacker.
Right. Yeah, I think that's obviously discounting all of the other advantages of a home field advantage, right? Like
like living there with all your stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Not having to worry about logistics, having your reships right there, there's lots of reasons why there's defender advantage for sure. Yeah, so this actually kind of brings to mind something I've been thinking about, because, there's a lot of people that are or have been on the CSM, public figures in particular, that get, chided, or there's a lot of hate thrown in their direction by the haters, whatever. If I remember correctly, I mean, like, you have your own group of haters, more or less, right? But one of the things I would say is that, like, pay attention to the kind of people that hate on Phantomite, right? Like, know me by my enemies.
Are we talking about RSA in my thread?
Oh, I'm just, well, I mean, there's lots of examples that we could give. I wasn't necessarily alluding to any one of them, but you get what I'm saying. Like what I'm
willing to allude directly to them.
Even with this Ensilibix discussion, right? Like,
yeah,
you're willing to push back, you're willing to defend your ideas, and you're willing to go with an idea that is not popular. And therefore, if somebody's a reactionary, then they are more likely to be hostile to your essence. That's why I say, like, look at the quality, look at the person who is upset at Phantomite, and that should, know me by my enemies, right? And I think that that's actually a pretty good attestment to your character, in a weird way.
Thank you. Well, I feel like, what is the point in putting effort into campaigning and then hopefully being on the CSM if I adopt ideas that aren't going to fundamentally attempt to fix major issues in the concept of EVE Online?
Right. That being said,
yeah,
what would you say to those who would argue that the problem that needs to get fixed is Snuff itself? That Snuff causes the problem.
Snuff's the problem.
Yeah.
Snuff's
Okay.
a problem.
So
One
you're
of the
part of the
biggest
problem?
things that I want to... Yeah, absolutely.
Fair enough. How are you going to fix
Yeah.
that?
I want, for instance, as something that's very obviously going to be highly related, I want to make sure that as faction warfare gets designed over the next few months, that it has suitable content that isn't going to just be able to have a cyno lit on it and
Right.
have everybody flushed out. That's the
Yes.
most basic, most obvious thing, right?
That's a fucking
Um,
fantastic answer, because this is one of the things that have always bothered me. Sorry for jumping in there. But like, people
no,
talk
go, go,
about
go.
the oppression of snuff into the war zone. But here's the thing. Outside of the actual iHub bashes, which, they can't be there all the time, 90% of the stuff that is actually important to faction warfare cannot be addressed by capitals. You can't light sinos and plexes. You can't bring capitals in anything besides open complexes. Like, faction warfare itself is resistant to organizations like Snuff from being able to oppress it. The oppression comes from apex level situations like structures. You can't have structures in a world in lowsec in a world in which Snuff exists.
Yeah, we see. I just want to address something in chat. Stein Control says that I'm a faction warzone parasite that will kill a new bro, and Stein Control, yeah, I will kill a new bro. I'll attack any ship, anywhere, for any reason, and not really sure that that's really a problem given the nature of EVE Online. I want there to be a huge expansion upon the concept of dead space with acceleration gates. I think that that's absolutely ripe for expanding upon that concept with more of these sites, with more rewards inside, and hopefully something that I brought up at the faction warfare panel is I also want to see faction warfare PvE that is blended with PvP in a small fleet context as well.
Right.
I want to see some stuff that requires that you be in a roughly PvP fit set of ships to take on NPCs and earn money as a functioning fleet. Because something that's lacking in most of the game is blended PvE and PvP.
Yes, I call it PvPvE. Absolutely. And they've
Yes, I
kind of talked
wondered if
about
I
that.
saw that on your server. Yeah.
Yeah, PvPvE. Events are really good for that, putting events in low sec. A lot of people like to discount events, but events are really good at like stirring up content, bringing people into low sec, doing cool stuff, especially things like the hunt, where you have a lot of people in destroyers and frigates that feel
I
comfortable.
did
Like,
that.
yeah. It's a really
I
good
did
place.
a whole bunch of that with a friend, and because of the destroyer limitation, it was for like a duo, like two people running it.
Mm-hmm.
It was virgin territory in terms of obvious setups. Something that we
Right.
settled on in the end. Can you guess the two or roughly the two types of ships that we found worked quite well?
Well, assault frigates usually do really well in those sites.
We didn't use an assault frigate.
And I know that the Draugr was very popular a year ago.
That's too expensive. I'll tell you what we
No,
did.
there was a 10 MN Draugr that was used by I can't remember who it was. Somebody.
Yeah.
But either way, what was it?
We found with a remote rep on each, we found that a command destroyer and an interdictor was a fascinating thing to fly. We've got a fair amount of DPS from an interdictor. Typically, we were using a heretic, and for the command destroyer, we were using a pontifex, and it gave us some fascinating asymmetrical cooperation in there.
Right.
We'd be able to play with the rats a little by jumping off to begin with, or and then we'd be fighting them as they came to us, strung out from the center, and then we could jump back to go into the next room, or better than this, we could jump back directly onto the entrance when we saw people approaching from the outside, or we could go into people, and if they were far away we could jump onto them, that kind of thing there. We're not very fast, but the interesting asymmetry of those two ships together made it complex and interesting, and
Right.
it was blended PvE and PvP. It was brilliant.
Right. And it does, like, it, for those people who actually have done it, it does blend in, like it does feel like it just transitions from PvE to PvP and PvE, you know, like it's all just one thing.
Let's address the elephant in the room.
Sure.
Pochven is an ideal example of some decent money-making mechanics that are blended with PvP.
Ideal's probably a stretch, but I understand what you're saying. I would say
the dynamic that it has turned out in there is something that could be a long discussion, but I would really want to see blended PvE PvP that is not too dissimilar from Pochven PvE,
right,
as part of faction warfare, but with lower income and limits on the gates to make sites that you run in a fleet of frigates, that you run in a fleet of cruisers, that you might run in a fleet of battle cruisers.
Right.
I want there to be spaces that small fleets of, and here's an important thing as well, reasonably cheap ships can have an opportunity to make money and fight at the same time.
Right. And to that end, there was some pretty strong hints that this is one of the things that they're looking at for the Warzone, you know, revamp, right? Because not only do they talk about like different systems having different activities in them based on whether or not they are frontline or a headquarters or a rear guard or whatever the hell their names are, but also there was a bullet point that said like Warzone site or something like that. It implied the fact that like you were going in and there's a fight going on between NPCs that you helped with.
I asked at the round table, and I specifically asked, is there going to be fleet PvE, so that people are already in space,
right,
in combat ready setups? Because right now, pretty much all PvE in the game is basically, to be competitive at it, to be competitive at your money making, requires that you be in a min-max PvE fit.
Absolutely.
So is it any surprise that PvEers leave when somebody tries to PvP them?
Right. And this is, I mean, I've said for a long time that this is one of the biggest advantages of faction warfare. It's the only place to make like a PvE kind of income using PvP setups. But even that's not perfect because plexing has a lot of meh. Like it's one thing. And plexing is wonderful mechanics, but I agree that it really does feel like it should be one part of what's happening, right? As I begin to plex the system, it should escalate. You know, there should be new things that happen. There should be roaming packs coming around. There should be, you get what I'm saying? Like I should feel like I'm getting closer and closer and closer to taking it, which it doesn't right now.
It's the key thing here is that the PvE, the NPCs to fight, should require that you be part of a gang or a small fleet to complete. Because that while there needs to be space for a solo ship to make some money as well, having fleet PvE means that it's more viable to be in a PvP fit while you're doing it, and it is social interaction between players, even within that group that's doing it, and that is the key to enticing people to want to stick around, and it's because it's fun.
Right. Well, so I remember Invasions was brilliant, right? When it came to group PvE, I think that has been like one of the tippy tops that they've ever played with. And I'm not even talking about chapter 3. I'm talking about like chapter 1 and 2, right? I even remember on the very first week of Invasions, before there were any sites at all, right? There was just roaming packs within invaded systems. There were no conduits to run or anything like that. I remember on the second day, roaming around with our little Caracal Osprey gang, trying to hunt down Zoria packs, and thinking to myself and talking to the fleet about it and being like, you know what? This feels like faction warfare. Like, in a weird way, because like the act of using D-scan to hunt for your enemies all over the place, trying to pounce on them, you know, moving around between different locations, skirmish, you know, switching between skirmishing and hunting really quick. Like all that felt very faction warfare-ish. And so even from back then, we've been like, man, if only they could like just make faction warfare into invasions, or rather make invasions into faction warfare. I think that we would be in a pretty awesome place when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah. exactly. I think that blended PvE and PvP is the perfect future for how we treat content in EVE Online,
But
because something I'm really not a fan of is endlessly partitioning parts of EVE Online off. Ithaca, who I believe you've already interviewed,
he was my first,
um,
actually.
excellent. He's been something that he has touted quite often is a CCP developer saying that EVE Online is 30 different games. Something that I never ever want to see is for all of those 30 games to be preserved by separating them from each other.
Right. That's a good point. I
Yeah.
actually do want to give you an opportunity to kind of address something that's being talked about in chat, which is that, like,
Mm.
are you suggesting that we should move away from solo content and promote primarily fleet content, or are you saying that there's room for both?
I mean, just because we'd be adding some brilliant fleet content to the game, well, I'm not sure why that means that we would be deleting the content that solo people enjoy.
I find that this is a misconception that people have all the time, right? Like, especially when it comes to like lore stuff or like the PvE stuff or the MPE stuff. It always feels like when people are talking about it that they somehow feel like if CCP puts in new PvE, that they're going to then take out PvP. This is somehow going to hurt PvP. And I just don't see that as being a thing. It's not like the PvP is still going to be good. Like the mechanics of PvP is fun. It's just we need people to be out there and doing it. And we need people to have excuses to do it. And that's what the PvE is for. So incentivizing different kinds of things.
The difference with blended content is that it puts people who want to fight in space by giving them something to do while they look for other players to fight.
Right, exactly.
Typically, right, and if for instance, if there's no structure objective or a timer or something, and you want to fight somebody, then without blended PvE PvP content, most groups sit docked waiting for somebody else to undock first. Whereas if there's a reason to already be in space, I mean, I don't need to say anymore. You know exactly what I mean by that.
Right, and to another point that's being brought up in chat, they don't do a lot of fleet content because there's not any fleets up. Well, chicken or egg, right? Like if there was more content that required fleets to do, then there would be more people putting together those fleets to do them.
Something that is true that almost certainly could be fueling this kind of opinion is that, you know, there's not a lot going on in the game compared to how things used to be. There's not a lot of people out and about,
right,
doing what like they used to be. The key to getting people to undock is not telling people, well, just undock then if you're upset that nobody else is undocked. It's like, right, we need something to do, and that starts with economic activities.
Right. You go out there for an objective, and if you get a fight, then you get a fight. If you don't get a fight, then you don't get a fight. You know, whatever. But there's got to be a reason and a cause for you to be there. Actually, just last night I was running around in faction warfare space with a new bro trying to help him learn how to make fights, and it was the first time that in a long time that I've tried to like just do it as a pirate, and I've realized how much harder it is to initiate or to provoke fights in the war zone when you're not in faction warfare. People like to say like, "Oh, well, I left faction warfare so that way I have twice as many targets." But the act of going into the plex and starting to plex it to threaten their stuff, to disrupt their things, to move the percentages up, that's how you force the issue, right? That's how you start to get people to show up. That's how you
cause a problem.
Exactly. You give them a reason to have to come and deal with you. Otherwise, if you're just a pirate, then why wouldn't they just leave and not engage with you and hope that you wander off so that way they can get their work done?
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Under ship balance, you talk about a total rebalance of T1, Navy, and pirate battleships. We just got a total improvement to these things. You're obviously leaving off Black Ops and Marauders. So tell me a little bit more about your rebalance idea.
I am talking specifically about non-Tech 2 battleships, because I feel that Tech 2 battleships have their niches working pretty well. I feel that Blops battleships, I'm I mean, there isn't an example of a ship in the game that couldn't do with some tweaking to a major or tiny extent. So understand when I say that I think blops are in a good place. I feel that their purpose is in a good place. I feel that they are currently being used as bridges. They're being used as conduit ships. They are being used as direct fire ships that are jumping into kill targets. I don't feel that they need any major changes. T1
Well,
Navy and pirate battleships. Go on,
it's
sorry.
worth noting that both Marauders and Black Ops have gotten some pretty significant buffs changes in the last year. And so I
They
feel
have.
like those have actually, you're right, those have very much addressed a lot of the pain points on both of those ships. The Black Ops got a lot more damage capabilities, and Marauders are just silly.
Can we do one of my something that people request, but it's a stupid request?
Yes, let's play the game of everyone else is stupid and Phantomite knows what he's talking about.
It's not going to be everybody else, and I'm sure you're going to agree with me, and I'm sure that most people in chat are going to agree with me. People who request Covops cloaks on battleships and who request full Tech 2 resists on Black Ops battleships.
Yeah, I feel like they haven't thought it all the way through.
They haven't thought it all the way through. The reasoning behind we want a Covops clock is they say because it's a Black Ops. What does that sentence mean? What does that sentence actually mean here?
Right.
Imagine the smart bombing that would be going on oppressively everywhere with Covops battleships. Anyway, the Tech 2 resists. I'll tell you what people say a lot about Tech 2 resists on blops. They say because it's difficult to use them in a fleet context. And my answer is yes. That's right. That's not what they're for.
I mean,
here's
based
a
and
host
true,
of other
I guess.
battleships.
All right, so T2 battleships are in a pretty okay place, but T1 faction and Navy aren't. The Macarial isn't good enough. What's going on?
The Macarial is too obviously. The Macarial and a number of others are too obviously brilliant, and they obsolete a lot of other choices. The way that I would want Tech 1, Navy, and pirate battleships to be is I would like Tech 1 to be much more viable in fleets, and that is done by making Navy and pirate battleships not simply better. Do you understand where I go when I say simply better? Yeah.
One of the things that have been asked for is the idea of like the anti-marshal. So what if it required you to have low security status in order to get the full benefit of pirate ships?
This is coming from me as somebody who is nearly -10. Didn't say -10 because somebody would pounce on that. Minus 9.9. Here's somebody who is has been close to -10 for a very long time. I feel that would limit the use of these ships and potentially make them too strong in the hands of a very few set of players. I'd like to think about that one more. People have suggested it for a little while. It's something that I haven't decided is a good or a bad idea in my own opinion, but I'm not going to be saying that I support that at this moment.
Fair enough. So, but now I'm confused though, because it sounded to me like you wanted to rein in pirate ships, but then when I suggested a way to rein in pirate ships, you said that would make them too weak.
I want to rein them in a fleet context. A number of pirate battleships have available EHP that makes them simply absolutely incredible in fleet contexts. Whereas I feel that should be the domain of Empire Navy battleships. I feel that Empire Navy battleships should be the battleships that are fleet focused.
That's a solid argument.
EHP. I think that pirate battleships should still be viable in fleets. I just think that they should offer something more interesting and niche rather than offering something that's simply better than everything else.
Okay, but how though? Just nerfing its hit points?
I think that
Like you
improving the
said, complete
survivability.
rebalance or total rebalance. So that implies something dramatic.
So it's the purpose. I think that the purposes of these ships need to be looked at. Um, I feel like things like the vanilla Megathron, the Baden, the Rock are ideal ships, and I want them to be valid choices, and it has to be choices, not just the best. I want them to be valid choices for fleet work, and by fleet work I mean everything from medium, large, and extra large fleet sizes. Um, and I want Navy battleships to offer something extra on top of that,
Right.
without them being it's the same ship but it has 25% more EHP. Because the same ship plus 25% more EHP just becomes the bar.
Right. So in general, Navy is defined as having increased AHP and increased like application. However, it's been long since said that faction battle cruisers, but also faction battleships, are seen as just
Mm.
being relatively lackluster for various reasons.
One of the biggest problems with Empire Navy battleships is that there are currently not enough situations in the game for close range weapons to work. Like, for instance, there's nothing I would change about the Megathron and the Navy Megathron. I would change the situations in EVE Online around those ships to bring close range back to more reasonably viable.
Right. So a good example, or what I think is a good example, you can tell me if you think it's a good example of what
Mm.
you're kind of talking about, is the Armageddon. The Armageddon has newt range bonuses, where the Balgorn has newt strength bonuses and the ability to use Gnosis as if they were newts.
And yet
So,
we see people using the Geddon anyway, even though the
right.
Balgorn.
But that's
Yeah,
my point, is that like if you
yeah,
need super ranged newts, you're going to bring an Armageddon because the Balgorn doesn't get those newt range bonuses. But if you're
yes.
going to be up close, then the Balgorn's superior. So there's actually legitimately good reason to use
Hmm.
an Armageddon, and there's legitimately good reason to use a Balgorn. I think that the relationship
Yes.
between those two ships are really, really good. Comparatively, the Rattlesnake versus let's say the Raven or the Scorpion is like broken.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for instance, I look at things like um the rattlesnake, and I look at the unbelievable EHP that you can get out of that without putting on some kind of dream perfect rolled fit, without being in a wormhole that gives a bonus to your shield hit points, things like that. Even the normal realistic stats that you can get out of some of these ships now, especially with the 100% shield bonus and the 50% plate bonus, is I don't think it's a healthy place for these ships. I want them to be useful. I want them to be used. I
I,
feel that the situations in the game need to change rather than the ships need to fundamentally change.
I think that the best indication of like how strong the Rattlesnake tank is
Hmm.
the Rattlesnake is the only subcap that I think can think of that like so when Arataka Research Consortium are fighting
Hmm.
drifter battleships and they just
Yes.
need to tank the Doomsday straight to the face, they use a
Yeah.
Rattlesnake. I think that's pretty telling, right? Like the fact that a Rattlesnake can take a hit to the face that's designed to blow up Marauders is a pretty
Yeah.
damning indictment. But it's also just like the Rattlesnake ends up getting. I mean, like this is true about the entire Garissus ship line because of the
Yeah.
resistances that they get from the Kaldari and all that stuff. Just makes them incredibly good at, in particular, PVE. Is there something wrong with different pirate ships being the best at? Like, is there really a big deal that the Macarial stands out as the best PvP ship, or that the Rattlesnake stands out as one of the best PvE ships?
The issue isn't that something in the game is the best at something. The issue is that it stays the best at something. I
Okay.
think that full perfect balance for any game, and especially EVE Online, is absolutely impossible. However, if things were constantly shifting and being tweaked on a far more regular basis and across a broader range of ships and weapons, then a lot of power would go into the hands of the people who were smart theory crafters. If you leave things for
Right.
too long, problems become solved, and when problems are left solved for too long, we all get bored.
Oh man, this is something I do want to talk to you about. Okay.
Yeah.
So, because we're talking about like the way that popular opinion's wrong and how these things play out over time and kind of a meta example. You're really smart.
Not all popular opinion.
Right, but the ones that are. So I want to rip this one apart with you a little bit and see what you have to say about it, because this is something that's bothered me. Okay, so we have this long-standing tradition of players complaining to CCP about specific metas that are over dominant. Right. Historically, we have three big examples. We have the Svitpol, we have the Munin, and we have the Machariel.
There's a theme here, isn't there?
What is the similarity between those three? Well, the thing is that, as it turns out, the versatility and the high alpha of projectiles plus the speed of Minmatar ships just happen to make them the best in class for the things in which those ship sizes are used for, if you're talking about open conflict, right? If you're talking about inside of a Plex or inside of some sort of special scenario, then whatever. But if you're talking about fighting over a structure or fighting over a POCO or fighting over whatever, then those...
Context.
Right. Range, alpha, speed. These end up becoming incredibly valuable, which means it just ends up so happens that it's always...
choice of damage type.
Right. So it always so happens that in those conditions, the Minmatar just happens to accidentally be the best in those scenarios. And yet the player base always turns to CCP as if this is a fundamental problem. Is this a fundamental problem? Does the Minmatar just have too much going for them? Or is this a sort of situation where it's like we're focusing on very specific niches, like we're prioritizing certain kinds of conflict over other kinds of conflict when we talk about the oppressiveness of ships?
The Minmatar issue is that they have all of those things at the same time, but I believe that this is fully addressable by simply looking at on a ship by ship basis and a weapon by weapon basis, just taking one of those things away on each of these things. Something that I want to see is and this is across the board, not just with artillery as an example, is I want to see effective long range weapon ranges brought down across the board. This feeds into me wanting there to be more situations in which close range weapons start to become more viable. I feel that too much fighting, I feel that pretty much most fleet fights use ranged weapons even if people are close to each other. Reasonably close to each other, because I feel that these weapons perform too comparatively well at mid ranges compared to close range weapons at their long ranges, and I just want to bring these ships physically closer together. I think that by bringing things physically closer together across the board in this game, in combat, is going to shake up the meta so much that we might not, if that was the case now, we might not be having this conversation that Minmatar is generally OP.
Right. So, and that's my thing, is that like, is this an issue with the Svitpol and the Munin and, you know, all these things? Or is it that there's something fundamental, like the Minmatar, the set of strengths and weaknesses that the Minmatar ship classes or ship design happens to be like the correct key for the lock of like open skirmishy conflict, right?
I think that it's almost entirely fair to say that it's a Minmatar problem because of their weapon systems, their typical slot layouts, and have you seen the resist profile on a lot of Minmatar ships like the Svitpol and the Loki, for instance?
Right. Well, that's another problem.
Almost flat. What's the deal with that?
Well,
just stick a hole in it.
Actually, that's a really good point. So yeah. One of the biggest weaknesses with shields is the fact that they have 0 EM resistance. Like famously, Caldari T2 ships even have 0 EM resistances. However, T2 ships get the resistances against their enemy empire. The enemy empire of the Minmatar is a Mar. The damage type of a Mar is EM. Therefore, Minmatar T2 ships have really good EM, which is unusual for shields. That's why they have that flat.
They don't have a deep hole in something else.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, like they don't have like
Anyway, I'm
like
looking at the
Caldari
meaning.
ships will have extra thermal, for example,
Yeah,
because of the other side. But it just so happens that filling that EM hole happens to be, again, it's just like the conditions exist such that everything that the Minmatar like focus on happen to be incredibly important in those big scale fleet fights, in the things that people focus on. So again, like, do we fix this problem by continuing to chase it down, by nerfing the Svitpol, by nerfing the Munin, all this kinds of stuff? Or is this something that we really do have to look at the Minmatar fighting style as a whole and look at whether or not it needs to be addressed?
I would like to see if the same problems are as bad as they are now after a close range revolution.
The last close range revolution was Surgical Strike, and
It
that
was
went
not a
so
close
well that
range
they had to
revolution. It
halfway.
was a nerf.
Well, I mean, they increased short range ammo.
Yes, but lowering of resistances just favoured long
Well,
range weapons.
fair enough, but
And
my point is that like the
yeah.
last time they tried to buff short range conflict, they ended up with Surgical Strike, which had to be halfway reverted. Do you think that that's like what would you do instead?
Well, like I said, particularly with medium-sized long-range weapons, but across the board, I want ranges to be brought closer together on long-range weapons, medium and large. I'm not happy with the idea that Munins can be perfectly effective at 90 kilometers. I'd like to see them be perhaps something like 70 to have that same level of damage output. If you bring things closer to be effective, if you bring them to somewhere like 70, then they start to get in range of webs and things like that. And a lot of the things that would be able to reach them with webs are also reasonably susceptible to Munins as it is.
Right. I always think about like the range of 100 kilometers because of micro jump drives and 150 kilometers because of warping. So like if they're at that 130-kilometer range, or above 100-kilometer range, it's easy. Like then the ability to maneuver around the battlefield becomes far more important. It was brought up earlier that Cerberuses are of course a good example, but I would say that they have kind of taken their position only after two Munin nerfs. And if anything, I would say that the Cerberus is the exception that proves the rule, right? You see a lot of the same things that make the Cerberus good. The ability to, select damage, the tankability of it, its speed, its range, these kinds of things. The same things that make the Munin good are the same things that kind of make the Cerberus good, especially once you reined in the Munin. So
See, the
it's
Cerberus is interesting. You pointed out that obviously Caldari ships, even T2 ones, still have a deep, deep EM hull, right? And it's not as much of an issue for Caldari as a deep hull might be for Minmatar because they have more mids.
yep, that's true.
So, they've got the slot to fill that hull. Minmatar ships don't necessarily have the mid slot to fix a deep hull. Or if they did choose to use a mid slot to fix a deep shield hull, they would be having to sacrifice an invuln or an extender or something like that to be able to achieve that. Or they'd have to accept lower resists across the board.
So you're saying that bringing in the range is a big thing.
Yes.
Now the Munin has a range bonus, and this is one of the things that people have pointed out as being like an issue with the Munin. Could this
Yeah.
just be an issue of attacking range bonuses as opposed to the actual range of the weapon systems themselves?
No, I think that if you reined in the range of the gun itself rather than the Munin, then the Munin still gets to has its speciality that it operates further away than the other available ships that you might fit artillery on, like a Hurricane, for instance.
How does that not just kick the can down? Well, bring the can a little bit closer. Like it's the same problem, right? If Munin is comparatively shooting further than everything else, then does it matter?
It's shooting further than the other items, but it has been brought into a more effective range of things like pulse lasers.
Okay, I see. All right. Well, I think that that's probably good enough to digging into that topic for now. unless there was something else about Navy. But I think we pretty much covered all of that stuff. And oh yeah, we just talked about sweeping partial reduction in effective ranges for all ranged focused combat. There you go.
Yeah.
Fleet-based PvE content. We talked about that.
Very important.
Faction warfare as a primary source for in-demand ships. So I'm assuming that like during this scarcity thing, when faction ships were like impossible to build because of the requirements for the doodads, Empire faction ships remained relatively reasonable to buy, where pirate ships exploded in price because Empire faction ships can be purchased through LP. So basically there was this release valve that really promoted those faction warfare groups to be pumping out their VNIs and their CNIs and their, all that kind of stuff. So is that what you're talking about? Like moving more towards allowing faction warfare to be a primary supplier for these ships, or is it something different?
If, for instance, it came to be that that I was able to improve the viability of close range combat and focus on Empire Navy battleships as viable fleet doctrines, then ships being a fleet doctrine is raising demand. And faction warfare is an obvious potential supply of Navy faction ships. So you make these ships viable and useful and desired, and faction warfare is the ideal place to have a place to make money by acquiring them and selling them.
Right. Hold on one second. I just need to make sure, check on my time. Oh, yeah, never mind. So we need to be wrapping this up soon. I'm getting low on my time. So is there anything serious that you want to... hold on.
Yes.
That I've missed?
Well, I'm just loading up my specifics page again, because there's a couple of things just at the bottom that I want to touch upon quickly.
I'm going to push back on non-instanced, no more instance PvE.
Go on.
Convince me that instance PvE, insofar as like the Abyss, is a problem, knowing that there is danger in doing the Abyss, in the fact that it is a challenging PvE encounter, and it can be disrupted on their way out. Why is that insufficient?
Because right now it makes a comparatively huge amount of money compared to riskier activities in the game.
I don't know if I necessarily agree that the other activities are riskier, and I would say that the Abyss requires more. That doesn't necessarily make them riskier, because if my risk is that a player comes in while I'm in an area that's relatively dead, that has a umbrella, the chances of that risk being realized isn't very high. But the chances of me jumping into a marshal room is like 1 in 10. You get what I'm saying? Like the risk is different, but it's not less.
The issue is that, especially for things lower than the highest end sets of abyssals, it's essentially a solved problem. You can just spend a bunch of money on a ship that everybody has proven to work 100,000 times in the Abyss.
But like T3 is like mission level. Like, level 4 missions are also pretty rudimentary.
Yes, but when you have it as a solved problem, then this is essentially something that you can just repeat, but you can do it in a place where people can't see what you're doing and can't get at you.
Are havens a solved problem?
Yes.
Okay. So why is it the instance that's causing the problem? I would say that havens are safer than the Abyss.
Because you can just warp out. I mean, if the implication here is that the abyssal environment itself with its NPCs is a meaningful amount of risk, then that's certainly true in the higher level ones. But being a solved problem, it's not a notable risk in the lower end ones.
Well, neither are havens. I mean, like at best, my Myrmidon gets killed. Who cares?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the solved nature of various anomalies either.
Fair enough. So just for the record, in the last 90 days,
Mhm.
7.3 trillion ISK has been destroyed in Abyss. Not in Abyss PvP, just the Abyss.
Okay. Yeah.
Doesn't that kind of imply that it's a bit dangerous?
We need to know how many people are running these and what the size the faucet of ISK is for that number to make sense.
Ooh, I bet we could work that out when it comes by using Triglavian data sheets. But that's a journey for another time. Anything else that you want to cover before we head out?
Yeah, I've just got a few things to rattle off quickly. I want CCP to explode their number of available cosmetics because I don't care. And at best,
Stealing
CCP
my
makes
thunder.
a bunch of money.
Hold up. No, we're going to do this right. All right. Ready?
Okay.
Last question from me. Cat ears, yes or no?
Knock yourself out. Have as much fun as you like. Stick them in the game. Give CCP some money.
Excellent. All right.
Sorry, I should have guessed that you were going to ask that.
No, I'm literally like cutting out that question for each person. And I'm going to make one video of me asking everybody. That's why I had to
remove the oppressive nature of the gate rats in nullsec because they screw you over even if you're flying a cruiser. They were put temporarily on the gates because they forgot that they needed somewhere for the rats to be when they removed them from belts.
I do find
Sort
it
that
hilarious.
out. Get them off the game.
The most impactful change to happen during scarcity was a mistake that happened, or like an accident that happened over an oversight.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to mention is I want CCP to maintain and provide a Discord bot to provide small groups with a method of authentication into their Discord so that they don't need to rent a server or have an IT guy.
Couldn't any of us produce such a thing? Why is it wouldn't that be, why would CCP need to do that?
Without needing an IT guy or somebody who knows how to make that kind of thing.
I mean, I don't need to know how the Twitch to Eve bot works for me to utilize Lumicode's tool.
Yeah. It shouldn't have to rely on somebody's tool that you should install. You should just be able to install the one that CCP maintain, and it should give you very basic functionality for basic auth so that somebody can just, with no understanding, can just do it and have the basics of a group set up. I think that the work that all the developers do on these tools that they have made available as third parties is incredible, and it's only going to get wilder as things go on and as the ESI likely gets replaced with something even more capable. But it would help people make groups if they just had something instantly available and simple that they could install that was maintained by CCP and guaranteed to keep working.
I do appreciate the people in chat that are doubling down and saying, no, don't just leave the rats on the gates, but give them dictors. All right, well, thank you for coming, Phantomite. You've been on the CSM before, gotten some work done, want to come back again, got some really good ideas.
Thank you.
Represent some pretty terrible people, but hopefully we can maybe redeem you out of this whole process. Who knows?
The difficulty with that is when I was part of a small group, then people as part of large groups screamed at me that I had no experience of being in a large group. And now that I'm in a large group, people scream at me that I don't have experience of being in a small group. So
turns out you're not going to make everybody happy. Well,
no.
Either way, you are a very strong candidate. I think that especially in this world in which there's only 3 incumbents, it is absolutely worth taking a second look at all of the people that have been on the CSM before that for some reason are coming back and deciding that they want another go at it. Masochists, all of them, Phantomite being one of them. You are one of those people that have been very consistent, very vocal, and willing to both stand up for your beliefs, but also stand up against those who may screech against it, which as a person who frequently describes my time in EVE Online as speaking calmly into the hurricane, I can absolutely appreciate the amount of fortitude and mental tenacity it takes to be able to do such things long term. So a very solid candidate, not just a snuff candidate, as it were, I would say. And in a world in which faction warfare and all this stuff is going to be looked at and is a big focus, Phantomite is one of those people that is asking for your vote to be able to have a big piece of that, and has really good reason to. So I wish you the best of luck, my friend. Good luck. I hope to have you, like, you're one of those people that please come back either way. And we've got plenty of other things to talk about when it comes to this shit.
I'd love to. And, after elections, win or lose, then
yeah,
my opinions remain exactly the same.
I can vouch for that. So, on behalf of Phantomite and myself, thank you guys for watching. If you're checking this out on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Ask any questions for Phantomite down in the doobly-doo down below, or sorry, in the comments down below. There will be links in the doobly-doo to Phantomite's posts and stuff. And if you're watching this on the playlist, you can just hang tight and it'll go on to the next one. But either way, thank you guys for being willing to check this out. Become an informed electorate, because that's how we get an effective CSM. It is so important for us to vote. It is so important for us to believe in the CSM and make an effective CSM. It is a tool that we have, and it's only as good as we make it by our votes. So once again, thank you, Phantomite, for participating in this whole thing, for taking the time to come here, and for wanting to even do this for another year.
Thank you.
And until next time, I have been Ashtarothi, the voice of New Eden, and I'll see you in space.